bit about my interesting career and the things I've learned along the way so that you can learn from my suffering instead of your own. And a little bit about courage, kindness, failure, fun. It's going to be fun. Lots of fun.
We're good? Okay, let's go. So, it's not play. I was allowed to go to schoolies. Far too dangerous. So instead I went and worked as a jillaroo. Because you know that's not dangerous.
Thank you so much, Lucy Bloom, for joining us here on my little humble podcast series.
My pleasure. How could I say no? You asked so nicely. Here I am.
Wonderful. And what an incredible role model. I've got my little Coco doggy here joining us.
Mine's fast asleep on the couch.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so like for me, the idea of echoes, it's really about storytelling. It's about these echoes of our stories that seem to transcend time and transcend language and transcend culture, you know, where we can connect through these universal experiences that we go through, or these unique experiences that we go through. And you've had some incredible, amazing, unique experiences. And I guess I'll give you a space to describe yourself or describe what it is that you do, but I guess I would describe you as a creative, as a social change maker, an entrepreneur, a CEO, a speaker. So it's a real honor to have you here. Yeah, thank you so much. You've done some incredible things in your life. So would you like to tell us a little bit about you? And perhaps what I'd like to start with actually is your name story. You have a wonderful name.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, my name is Lucy Bloom. Yep. Gosh, I say that a lot. My name is Lucy Bloom. I have to say that at the beginning of every recording I do. So I wasn't born Lucy Bloom. My mum named me Lucy because there was a lady up the road who was really nice. And that's the only story behind my first name. She's really nice. And then I had my dad's surname for 21 years, and then I was married for 21 years, and I had my husband's surname. And so when I got divorced, I was like, bugger that. I actually want to have my own name for the next 21 years and see how that rolls. So awesome. I thought on that for a little while, and there were three names I liked, and then I threw it to the internet to decide. There was Lucy Wild with an E. I thought that was kind of cool. There was Lucy Lovett, because I do love a bit of alliteration. And then there was Lucy Bloom. And the internet chose Lucy Bloom, and I'm kind of glad, because when I Googled Lucy Wild, she's a porn star. And her boobs are each like twice as big as my head. And I thought there's no way I would beat her search engine optimization on a name like that. So that's good. So I chose Lucy Bloom, and it makes me happy, and it's a sweet name, and it's a cute idea of sort of coming out of that 20-year marriage and blooming on my own terms, and yeah, it's fun, and it's my favorite chemist, Bloom's, around the corner.
Yeah, beautiful. And your middle name is Flamingo, right?
It is.
I love it.
Not christened that way. I had a really boring middle name, Anne with no E. And so when I came to fill in the paperwork to legally change my name to Lucy Bloom, because I wanted to go all out, like my passport, just be that name rather than juggle a few names. Yeah. And I noticed that you can only change your name 3 times in your life. Oh, and really? I changed it once. So I was like, well, I better make the most of this. And then my kids dared me they said, oh, bet you won't change your middle name to something really radical. And I was like, you can't say I bet you won't to me. Then I have to.
No, you will, yeah.
And so Flamingo it is. So Lucy Flamingo Bloom, which is a kind of cool name, because when my name was Lucy Ann Perry, I tell you what, nobody cared what my name was. Now if I'm late for a plane, they will call out the whole name. Yes. If I'm picking up a prescription at the chemist, they call out the whole name.
Love it. And it's such a nice way to segue into this idea of being radical and being a little bit of a rule breaker. And obviously the name goes hand in hand with your gorgeous looks.
Yeah, that's no accident.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the pink hair is definitely a standout. And something that I really love about your work and what you do is your ability to be unapologetic about being different, and being a rule breaker, bit outside the box, and going a little bit against the grain. And I like to use the word change maker as a way to describe myself, or radical, and I definitely would use those words to describe you. And
I guess I don't go asking for permission.
yeah, beautiful.
So, and part of that, if you don't ask for permission constantly, from everything from changing your name to colouring your hair to, moving to the beach when you're 40 to, whatever, planning wild horse tracks across cool places. When you're not asking others for permission to do that, then you truly, I guess at the base of that, you don't care what others think. And that's what I think is pretty crucial to happiness. And it took me, I was probably in my late 30s before I started actually doing that for real, where I was actually like, there really doesn't, there's no one whose opinion really matters that much to me that I would not live my full life for that opinion. And then I remember my brother said to me when I was having a whine about something, he said he'd read this Brené Brown little rule of thumb, where she says you get a 1-inch square of paper on which to write the names of all the people whose opinions matter to you.
Yeah, awesome.
And I have really big handwriting, so there's not that many people on that little square. And when you think about it that way, yeah, there's not that many people whose opinions matter. So
yeah, I really love that.
Even seek them, or even contemplate them. Yeah,
I feel like I'm coming into a bit of a sense of that in my own now. Just as I'm in my early 30s, so definitely it's a lifetime process to learn to detach from what we think others think of us, or trying to look good, or trying to avoid looking bad,
Yeah, or even when people do outwardly judge you, just witnessing it rather than taking it on board. Like, funny that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one thing that we have to cultivate as designers or freelancers is when we're working collaboratively with people, is like we put so much time and energy and effort, and we invest so much into the creations. But if you're working with someone like a client and they give you a piece of critical feedback, it's like, that's not a feedback about you and who you are as a person, and being able to detach from that as a personal thing and just being like, yep, okay, I'm a professional, we're going to get this job done together. And that's what collaboration looks like.
Yeah. And, the client has a different agenda and a different place they're heading.
Yeah.
So when you're a designer, you're creating beautiful work. You want work that looks brilliant and succeeds, but you also want it to be a portfolio piece. Yeah. And no one cocks up a portfolio piece faster than a client.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think as I became more experienced as an art director and was running my advertising agency for a long time, I gave that away quicker. I was like, yeah, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
You've got your agenda. They get their agenda better than you do. And so, it becomes much more collaborative. But I also found I used to, when the client briefed me really badly, I'd give them exactly what they asked for to show them how idiotic it was. And then I thought was a better option.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, nice. Giving them options is always good. Yeah. Something that often comes up for me in the conversations that I have with people, because they're often change makers and entrepreneurs and doing things differently, is this idea of outliers. And so one of these ideas, and I'd like to, maybe you could tell us a story or a time in your life where you felt like you had to face a lot of criticism or perhaps misunderstanding, but you knew in your heart that you had to do it anyway. But you were faced with all of this kind of confrontation, or can you tell us a little story about any time in your life where you may have faced that?
When I was the CEO of 2 international aid charities. And the reason why I was wildly successful in those roles was I brought my advertising industry brain with me. I didn't leave it at the door and then check out how this whole charity thing worked. Yeah. I ran those charities because we were raising funds to implement in Ethiopia and Cambodia. So as a fundraising entity, we're a communications business. So we're really just an ad agency with one client that was really specific, and we knew exactly who our donors were. And so I was criticised wholeheartedly for some of the ways I did that. But the numbers never lie. Honestly, I say that so often. It's the rule of thumb for a bunch of things. The numbers never lie. Yeah. So you can criticise me till the cows come home, but when I am raising millions of dollars and it works, that usually proves
pretty good KPI.
Wrong. Yeah. So, for example, one specific thing was the hospital in Ethiopia had always marketed itself through faith networks. So the founder was a strong Christian, and so she gathered people around her that had a strong faith, and so that's just the way it went. And so when I came along, I thought, well, I reckon non-Christians would support this too. It could be a perfectly secular conversation. And I was right. And I made it fun. So before that, it was all considered very serious. No one wanted to say the word vagina. Birth canal. And I think this is another rule of thumb of mine. You know, if there's an elephant in the room, you need to saddle it up and take it for a ride.
Yeah.
If people are afraid to say the word vagina, well, that's exactly what we need to say.
Yeah, brilliant.
And face exactly what it is we were doing instead of dancing a story around it being all very, you know, subtle.
Yeah.
That's not going to raise money.
Yeah.
Those criticisms, I just proved them wrong, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing.
Way to go.
Yeah, just brush it off and keep going. Keep being a badass.
Yeah, I guess so. It means you have to go into fight a bit. And I remember when I was really battling it out at one point, I remember saying, you know what, I'm a show pony, war horse. Yeah. You know, well, I don't want to fight with the people I'm fighting for. Mm-hmm. Then my energy isn't going into the positive things and the incredible outcomes and all the things that I'm hired to do. So it does become a drag when you're constantly criticised. You're easily criticised too because you stand out. But that's okay. I actually don't hear most criticisms. I just don't hear it. I'm not there to hear it.
Amazing. Yeah, just take it in your stride. Brilliant. And what an amazing body of work that you've done in Ethiopia and in Africa with empowering women. I'd love for you to tell us some of the stories that you've had of the work that you've done in Ethiopia.
Sure. So originally I volunteered my expertise as an art director, designer, photographer, copywriter to this hospital in Ethiopia. Loved what they did. And so I took them on as a pro bono client. Idiotic business decision, fabulous heart decision. I've made lots of those. Fabulous heart decisions where you just had the time of your life. Yeah. So I loved doing that because I had a skill set I could offer. The hospital really needed it. They didn't have anyone professional really looking after them and helping them fundraise. And I did that for 8 years. So I'd travel to Ethiopia every year, do a big photo shoot, traveled all over Ethiopia all by myself. It's amazing. Truly, it's such a wild country. It's quite different. Ethiopia is sort of it's like a melting pot of Arabic and African. Mm-hmm. It's the birthplace of the Rastafarian movement. There's actually a long history of Judaism in Ethiopia. It's such an unusual, fabulous country. So I loved that travel, loved being involved. And then I became, at the founder's request, she asked me to be the CEO of a brand new entity. And that's when I took the leap, and then I was full-time, hell for leather, working on that one gorgeous client who I raised a lot of money for, learnt an enormous amount, reporting to a board, zigzagging between Australia and Ethiopia. But I just loved it. It was amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. And so can you tell me a little bit about Another concept that I like to explore in my work is this dichotomy between masculine and feminine. And I guess for me, at least in the way that I view these two aspects, is masculine is that yang energy that is very outward driven, pragmatic. It's like the strategic planning brain, it's like action plan. How can we make shit happen? And the yin is that like meditation mind, like how can we sit back in the non-doing and access the creative visualization or visioning or even just intuitive mind, or the surrender to things, sometimes the letting go, And so having the balance of those two aspects in business, I think, is really important. And particularly, I think when we're talking about working with women in leadership, perhaps you could speak to a little bit about some of these two different qualities or these different aspects of business that are integral to making business work. And perhaps maybe you could speak to a little bit of some of your stance on that, on how we can be empowered female leaders and CEOs and business people.
Yeah, sure. I learned a huge amount about exactly what you described, having a good yin yang balance. In that first role, I didn't have a good balance. It was all very yang. A lot of strategic planning, a lot of go, 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 high pace, and probably not very sustainable. When I look back on it, good old hindsight, when I look back on it, I wouldn't have been able to sustain that for much longer, working at that pace. But my husband at the time used to say to me, because I am a balance of a heart thinker and a head thinker. Like I say, the numbers never lie. But there's also a heart. And when you're working with patients, they're not just a statistic or a surgery, they're a whole patient. And he used to remind me, well, what would your CEO head say? And then what would your Lucy head say? And that would often find me a really nice balance. I think Catherine Hamlin, who was the founder of the organisation in Ethiopia, she really brought a yin balance and very much that picture of the whole patient. So she didn't even see them just as a whole patient. She saw them as a whole human and sent them home with literacy and numeracy skills. They could stay in the hospital for a long time if they wanted the rest and the time, and to do things like learn to knit and have access to other healthcare and sit in the garden. So this is unusual for a hospital. Catherine put a lot of emphasis on the gardens because she just loved them.
Yeah.
She loved gardening, had old like English roses and stuff. Funnily enough, most of the world's roses are grown in Ethiopia because there's so much sunshine.
Wow.
But the gardens became a place of healing for those patients. They would sit in the sun, they would knit and chat. Often these girls come from villages where there's no one really their age. They might marry a man much older than them who has older wives, and there's really no company. Yep. So there was so much more allowed for. And I learned a lot of that from Catherine, that yes, she'd be operating and she'd operate on 6 patients a day. But there was this softness and gentleness to Catherine. She always had time for the patients. My goodness, when you went on the rounds with Catherine, it was like you had to write off 4 hours because she took so much time with each patient.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I think in those days I needed a lot more yin in my life. I think I found a much better balance for that. I allow things to percolate for a lot longer these days.
Yeah.
Or I have an idea and then I'll just let it marinate for longer rather than bam, take action.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. But yeah, I will certainly never work at that pace again. Not sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's definitely one of the key messages is we can get out of the hustle mindset and start to really follow in and hone in with what it is that really brings you joy in your life. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, and I'm kind of annoyed that I took till I was 40 on that. You hear it, but I only put it into practice when I turned 40.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about some of your work as a doula.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear your perspective. I also feel like I maybe am a little bit of an alternative mindset when it comes to women's health and when it comes to the whole conversation about pregnancy and labor and what that whole shebang is. And I think that from my personal experience and my personal perspective is, as young women, we're not educated on what to expect or on hardly any aspect of it except for what we're seeing in the media, which is representations of women screaming their heads off, traumatic births, and in my personal birth stories, I had this very kind of forced, strained labor with my first son, and then I had this dream-free birth at home with my daughter Livia, because I learned to trust my intuition in a way that I didn't in the first birth. I just listened to what people told me that I had to do. And I'd love it if you could speak to some of that about what you feel is maybe missing, and or what do you think is really powerful for women in the conversation about pregnancy and birth and motherhood. And
another big conversation.
Another big one.
Well, I did my doula training a long time ago, about 19 years ago. I only know exactly because my son was a baby. My first was a baby when I went, right, I'm going to be a doula. And he's about to turn 19. And I did it with a woman named Denise Love. Now, she's a pretty special lady. There is no one like Denise Love in the birth world.
Yeah.
You should interview her. She's an
I'm writing it down.
Gem.
Yeah.
She's now training people as death doulas.
Oh, cool.
But back then, I did her doula certification, and I'll never forget her saying, I actually traveled to Cambodia and spent some time with her there. And this is where she said this. She said, women in the West give birth in their heads. So we do educate them, but we educate them in a very medicalized way.
Totally.
So when they go to give birth, they're just caught up in their heads and what should happen. And what are the risks of this and the risks of that? And she said, women who don't have access to 15 books during their pregnancies, they give birth in their pelvis rather than their head. And I've never forgotten that. I also noticed that as a doula, I suddenly had access to all these births. So I'd had one birth, hospital birth, was pretty straightforward, hard going, but we got there. Then I attended a whole stack of births, and that just gave me a learning that you can't read in a book.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what we've lost is that ability for, like, my teenage girls should all be attending the births of women around us so that they're getting used to what it's like to see a baby born. And, the head pops out. Well, on the next push, probably the shoulders. Yeah. And then it's not a big freaky thing.
Totally.
So then I had a pretty wild second birth, and it was the story.
I do, yeah. Please tell it for the audiences if you like.
Well, in a nutshell, I gave birth at a party with 100 people in my house. And that wasn't planned. We planned a home birth, but she came 2 weeks early when the house was full of people.
Yes.
And I remember I just had to get my husband to catch the baby. And I remember just being so calm.
Yeah.
And him saying, what do I do? And me saying, well, on the next push, you're catching this baby. And honestly, I think that's because between my first and my second, I'd attended a whole stack of births. It had only been 2 years and 2.5 years, but I'd attended 10 or 12 births in that time and had all these different experiences. And so I was just really calm. Also, a second birth, your first paves the way.
You're a little bit more onto it. I think there's so much unknown in the first one because it's such an embodied experience. It's like literally a physical thing that you go through, and you can't possibly do that until you go through it.
So we're missing that little link, I think, where we attend births of our family and our community, and it's secret women's business, and we all gather around. I saw some incredible births in Cambodia, actually, where all the women gathered around. The men are kicked out. they have to wait in sort of outskirts of the birthing center, and it's just women in a really closed, tight circle, all focused on the mum. It's incredible. Yeah. So and they birth silently, which is really interesting because I'm really noisy. I shout the house down.
Oh man, the power of the voice! Holy moly! In those moments, in the power of the voice, full stop, but also for labor, man.
Yeah, that's right.
If you need to.
I think I don't know about my youngest, but my middle child, who's a girl, she's already said, Mum, I need you at the birth. When I have babies, if I have babies, I need you there. I can't imagine. And actually, I say this in my book. I wrote a childbirth guide for men. And in this book, it says, if your partner cannot imagine giving birth without her mum, she needs to be there.
Yeah.
But if you have her mum at the birth as some kind of peace offering, or because you feel you have to, bad. Do not do that. She's at this stage. She's only 16. At this stage, she's like, oh, Mum, I can't imagine giving birth without you, and that makes me very happy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's sweet. I had in my first birth, so I'm a triplet, so I had my two sisters there. Mum and Dad were both there. My sister's partner, a student midwife and a midwife. So the first birth was a spectacle for sure. And then the second birth, it was just me and my partner Jonas and our little son. He was probably 2 at the time. Yeah. And it was just so beautiful, the difference between that nice, sacred, intimate space and the spectacle of the first one.
Yeah. Some say ideally you give birth in the same atmosphere that you conceived.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that.
So, yeah, nice and close and dark and warm and
exactly.
private and
that's what animals do. You know, in the wild, they tend to go off into the cozy den or the darkest spot. You know.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the book that you wrote for.
Oh yes, I have one right here.
Amazing. Thanks to childbirth. I just want to say, what a fucking epic. Seriously, and I went on a whole trip about this, about how we need to include men in the conversation about childbirth, because otherwise they just bring their fear into the situation, or they bring their energy into it. This clueless energy actually infiltrates the energetic sphere of the woman, and it actually hinders what we need to do.
Yeah, totally messes with the hormone mix. Yeah, he has to be chill, supportive, calm, not distracted, in the moment. He's got to be a bunch of things.
Yeah.
When I wrote that book, I realized before I wrote that book, I created these childbirth classes for men. And I did that because I could see no one was speaking to men in their lingo, in their language, with their stories. So no one had gathered men's birth stories to ask them what was hard for them, what would they do differently.
And that's called Beer and Bubs, right?
Beer and Bubs, that is still going strong all over Australia.
Yeah, amazing. For any men watching this or listening to this and you're just about to have a baby.
And then I wrote the book, Cheers to Childbirth, out of that. So that's also still going strong.
Yeah, brilliant. What's one of the key takeaways, do you think, from that you can
from this book that you can, well, this is what I used to say at the beginning of workshops, basically to get their attention. And in a nutshell, if you do all the right things, you can make the birth easier and faster for your partner. You can actually influence that. Fuck this up, cock up the day of your baby, and you can do the opposite. You can actually make the birth slower and more painful for your partner. So then the next thing is to explain how that actually works, and the hormone mix, and how if you piss her off, you slow the labor down. Yeah. You FaceTime your brother and you irritate her, you actually make the labor more painful. The endorphins aren't working as well. So
and a lot of that has to do with the stress response, at least in what I've read. And as a meditation teacher, it has to do with the whole host of physiological things that go on when our stress response or fight or flight mode is triggered. We tighten up, we tense, we stress, and what we want to do when we're in labor is relax and let go and release and open.
And adrenaline blocks the good hormones. Adrenaline actually blocks the hormone that runs labor nice and efficiently, and the hormone that blocks the pain.
Yeah.
So you give her a fright, and it can be a really low level irritation.
Yeah.
Like your mother shows up and she's wearing a really strong perfume, or the midwife is gabbing on about her holiday. Like little irritations. It needs to be that environment, like we described, the same similar environment to the one you conceived that baby in. Unless it was, you know, in the back of a nightclub. Yeah, it needs to be private, and she's got to feel safe and ready to let loose.
For sure. Yeah. Oh,
that's probably the main takeaway. Also, what I adore about this book is that for the first time, men can see the man's point of view. So the dad's view of the birth is a completely different recollection to the woman, and they both are valid.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot to learn from that. There's a lot to learn from the validity of the bystander. And he gets hormonally involved as well. Men get this huge shot of testosterone just after their baby's born, and they go into protection mode. And it's kind of gorgeous. So I love that this book gave stories by men. And the second edition, I made sure it was really diverse. So there's 2 gay couples in there. There's a surrogacy, which is a really interesting one. 2 gay men had a surrogate for their baby, and the surrogate was one of the men's mum.
Whoa.
And the egg was provided by the other man's sister.
Whoa. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Technology. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. How incredible. That's a family affair.
Yeah. And she wasn't young either. The mum was in her 50s.
Wow.
When she carried that baby for them.
Wow.
Amazing.
An epic story. There's another story in your life that is a very powerful one, at least for me, in terms of I guess as a meditation teacher, something that I'm really fascinated is the power of the mind and how we can overcome pain and fear and discomfort in order to be the person that we want to be. And so one of the epic stories in your life is this crazy motorbike accident that you had when you were about 19, was it?
Yeah, my first year out of high school.
Yeah, I'd love it if you could share with us some of that story. And
sure.
Something that I'm really fascinated about is, so in your recovery, you spent a year, a week, and a day in hospital. Is that correct?
Funny old timing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very synchronicities, but also like that's a shit ton of time to be in hospital in a bed. And something that I am curious about is like, how were you in your mind to get through that, to be like the mindset and the meditation? And this is at a time without smartphones and without much internet, right?
Yeah. So there was no internet really. In the mid-90s, the internet existed, but it wasn't in our handbags.
Yeah,
it wasn't really accessible yet. Yeah. So,
and then speak to a little bit about how did you cope? What did you do for fun? And
the hardest thing about that year was I nearly died of boredom.
Yeah,
more than anything. So once I survived the stack,
and maybe you could describe for people how serious it was as well.
Yeah, sure. So I had a motorcycle accident on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. A guy just decided to change lanes super rapidly and just took me out. I didn't know that I was having an accident until I landed, actually. And then I thought back and I remember seeing the lights of North Sydney swirling the sky, and then I slid on my stomach with my motorcycle across 3 lanes and I hit the gutter. And I remember I sat up and said out loud, I've had an accident. And I saw my leg was off to like a big nasty angle. So I had a pretty spectacular tib and fib fracture, and I broke a bunch of my fingers and stuff. But I had 14 reconstructive operations to put me back together.
Wow.
I had infection after injury that caused a lot of the problems. So I lost a huge chunk of my right shin, and then it looked like I was going to lose my foot or my leg a fair way below the knee. So it was a big deal. And that year was to save my limb. And they did in the end. They did save my limb using pretty rad surgery where they actually had to use my left leg for blood supply. So they grafted my left calf to my right shin and they left it attached for a whole month, which was which was pretty wild.
Oh my
Not
God.
ideal for visitors. They left it open. So it was all bandaged, but the actual sort of bridge was left open so they could keep an eye on it. Yeah. And then I got to keep my legs, so that's good.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Gnarly scars. But yes, I had a lot of time in hospital. There wasn't even, honestly, in the early 90s, there wasn't even decent daytime television. That's when there was the midday show, and it was like just
the terrible,
worst. Yeah, it was
shonky.
like 70s lunchtime. Shocking.
Yeah. So what did you do? What did you have any tools or things that you would do, or did you just like read a lot, or like?
Yeah, I had so many surgeries that I couldn't read. I was too dopey.
Wow.
I couldn't. I didn't have that sort of attention span to read or do anything with my hands, like knit or anything. I was just too flaked out.
Yeah.
Some of my surgeries were long, 10-hour epics while they did all this microsurgery.
Yeah.
And I remember finding that the anxiety around the possibility of losing my leg was just terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And my mum visited me in hospital every single day.
Mm.
My dad visited me once to yell at me for having a motorcycle accident. My mum, on the other hand, every single day. And she said to me when she could see I was getting pretty worked up about the potential outcome. Like I couldn't fathom losing my leg. Like it was just so terrible. It was like just this side of dead. It was that bad a thought. I'm a totally different person now.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I just go, oh well, onwards and upwards.
Well,
I'll get a bionic leg then.
Yeah.
But I couldn't come at it. And so I remember Mum saying, just focus on what you can control.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard that many times in my life, but it's such good advice because the anxiety about my limb, I'm not the surgeon. I can't save my leg. I just had to trust the surgeons were doing their best.
Yeah.
But I could focus on things that I could control, which would be far more positive. And so I found myself, instead of catastrophizing about, I sort of tend to, I'm a sort of all or nothing, black and white, go the opposite.
Yeah.
Instead of catastrophizing about what could go wrong, I thought, well, what's the opposite of stewing on that? Well, that's fantasy land, not just thinking positive. It's like proper fantasy land. So I need something strong here. I need the full strength mind control here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started fantasizing about things that I could do when I was done, when I was out of hospital. It's all about time. Like, when will I get out? When will this be finished? When can I go home?
Mm-hmm.
And I had some really cool fantasies. I had a fantasy that I was going to buy a beach house and all my friends were going to come and live with me, and their rent would fund all my travels around the world. So I like to think
I think you pretty much got that.
Yeah. And then I had another fantasy that I would run an advertising agency, and I had it all worked out how the structure of the agency would work, and a really cool fantasy about riding a motorcycle across America. But I got right into it. So Mum bought me maps and guidebooks, and I stayed up late at night planning this whole thing.
Amazing.
And it was a much better way to use my mind.
Yeah.
I went from crying all day to butterflies. I was excited about these cool ideas I was exploring. Much better way to be. Better for your health, better for your appetite, your sleep, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And some of those fantasies I did actually go on to do. Haven't done the motorcycle trek yet. I'll do that one day.
Yes. So cool. So I guess just like to finish on from that is, and one of the things that you speak to in your work and obviously in all ways that you present yourself is fun. It's like, how can we find the fun? And so how do we find the fun and the humor and the lightheartedness in those sometimes really dark times, dark night of the soul?
Sometimes that, honestly, that's all you've got.
Yeah.
And things are really tough. All you've got is humor. And I've noticed we're doing this recording just after Queen Elizabeth has died.
Mm-hmm.
But I've noticed that almost immediately the humour, the gentle humour was coming out as a way of coping. And it's, I think it's a crucial thing. I found that with working with the patients in Ethiopia, their life stories are so flippin' tragic. And it would actually be too hard going psychologically to always focus on just how heartbreaking their stories are. Child brides, female genital mutilation, having babies far too young, ostracized from their village, no education. Like, could it get much worse? And so to see the light-hearted side of things, to see to not take ourselves and our work too seriously. Like, we're not saints, you know, it's just surgery. And I found that crucial so that I didn't get compassion fatigue, but that I also it didn't weigh me too heavily. It had to be fun. It had to be lighthearted at times. So yeah, I think finding the fun in things is actually a really crucial coping mechanism. I also think it's dead easy to do. You can find the fun in anything. I always say, if there's a metric, if there's a number in anything, you can gamify it. Any number. So I gamify my my GPS. Like, it'll say, I'll put in the address I've got to go, and it'll say, well, that's 1 hour and 4 minutes. And I'm like, well, I'll go your 1 hour. And to make a boring drive into, like, I'm gonna gain 4 minutes. And like so many ways. I remember when I was the CEO, one of my most boring jobs ever was reconciling my credit card statement for all my travel. So boring. And you've got to hunt down receipts and marry them. It's the worst. So I just delegated it. I gave it to someone else in the team. And I said, but I'll promise I'll make it fun. So every time I had a receipt, I had to send them a photo of the receipt. And so, but I would take really ridiculous photos of the receipt. So if it was a taxi driver, I'd make the taxi driver do a selfie with the receipt. And it's just dumb stuff like that. And she said, every time she got an email with the title receipt, I'd go receipt and then whatever it was, you know, taxi or whatever. She said her heart pounded, like, what the hell am I getting today? So you can make dead boring. You can also make sad things lighthearted and gentle. It doesn't always have to be super solemn.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's probably the key in sometimes making that deep message land, you know, at least in some of the work that I've done with like puppetry and theatre, particularly in youth theatre. It's like we can approach these serious topics with lightheartedness and fun, and it actually engages people in listening to what it is that you're actually delivering.
And you can also trick them a little bit.
So
it's the juxtaposition of the fun context, and then you can slam something home. So I have a friend who works as a clown, and I believe you know a clown too. And I met her doing Adelaide Fringe Festival, and she had a show. It was a clown show, but the show was actually about sexual assault. And people walked in there expecting something really fun, and they came out like they'd had a goosebumpy, like, time of it. But the clown kind of drew them in. In marketing, I call it jab, jab, right hook, where you go jab, jab with something really fun and lighthearted, and you bring your audience in. Oh, like, this is fun and games, and this is really interesting, and that's pretty cute. And then you right hook them with a devastating patient story. And they go, if they're going to get the every time, it's like, I can't deal with that today.
Too much. Totally.
So I remember once we got this fabulous $25,000 donation from Tupperware. And we would get more based on the sale of a particular item, and it was a little pink lunchbox. So for every one of those, we would get a further donation. And so I sent some lunchboxes to Ethiopia, and I said, just take photos of that lunchbox in all sorts of crazy places, and we'll make it like a bit of like a Where's Wally thing with this lunchbox. And
awesome.
We had them like on the dash of the trucks and in the ambulances, and we had patients holding them. We had them in pathology. We had them on Catherine's desk, and And no one expects, a serious, hospital to have that kind of fun.
Yeah.
And so when you do that kind of communication and that kind of fun content, a week later you can slam them with a story of a woman who had to run for her life. So hyenas didn't kill her because she smelled so bad from the incontinence she suffered. She ran all day. She left at dawn and ran all day.
Oh my goodness.
Telling her story, then you get a listen because you've done the jab, right hook.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. That leads me into a little bit of a conversation about communication. And something that when you spoke last week or 2 weeks ago when we spoke together at the Longreach event, you're talking about how we can speak the language of our audience as marketers or as communicators. We need to learn to speak the language of our audience.
Yeah.
And it's a key message. But one of the things that comes up for me, and especially being in the role or the archetype of an outlier or a change maker or someone who sometimes needs to use our voice to say the different thing or to say the outspoken thing. So how do we what's the secret behind being outspoken and being authentic and holding to our integrity, as well as speaking the language of the audiences and
that's such a good question. So from a marketing perspective, yes, you got to speak the language of your audience so that you can feel closer to them. So if you use too much jargon, you will immediately take a big step back from your audience because you sound really clever, but they don't get it. They don't know.
Yeah.
You need to use their vernacular, so their colloquialisms, their normal language rather than institutional type language.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. There are times when you've got to speak out, and that's when you need to be bold. Now, I read this article, and I actually mentioned this in the opening chapter of my book called Get the Girls Out. I read this article that referenced Jane Caro, and she had said something along the lines of, it's nice to be nice, but it's better to be bold. She wrote this amazing article about how if you are always towing the line and always using language that is politically correct, and you always make sure that you say things like almost or one of the or may make the you lighten and water down and soften everything, so you're in the end saying absolutely nothing. Here's an example of a campaign where it was about domestic violence and no one wanted to use a white woman in that ad in case they offended white women. So then they didn't want to use a black woman. Oh no, we might offend a black woman. Didn't want to use an overweight woman, a too skinny woman. It got to the point where, because it was designed by committee, worst way to design anything, it got to the point where they developed a poster campaign that had no pictures of women in them. They were so afraid to say something that they said nothing. So after reading that, I remember thinking, I'm going to keep that in mind. And honestly, it changed the way I wrote forevermore. It's nice to be nice, but it's better to be bold.
Yeah.
And that just means you need a slightly thicker skin because you're going to piss some people off. But that's okay.
Yeah.
So you're still using the language of your audience when you want to get close to people, when you want to convince, when you need to persuade, when you need to get them on board. But when you've got really important stuff to say, it needs to be bold, not nice. Bold.
Yeah.
She also used another gorgeous example of a poster campaign she did for wearing helmets in horse riding. So in the UK, huge horsey culture, but problem with girls not wanting to wear helmets. And they did a campaign, and there was a picture of a girl jumping, beautiful horse, beautiful mane, and her gorgeous brunette hair flowing behind her. She looked amazing. And the headline just said, blonde. So it's really clever. Set out to possibly it didn't set out, but may offend some blonde people. But it said so much. It was about the assumption that blonde women are dumb. This woman was dumb not wearing a helmet. It was so clever, said in one word. But it's edgy, bold stuff to get heard.
And it sometimes might get the little trigger that
and I think that's worth it. I think
totally.
it's worth the risk.
Amazing, brilliant. What about facing the fear and doing it anyway? You speak a lot to courage. So I wonder if you could share a little bit about a moment in your life where you were fucking shit scared and you did it anyway.
I think when I first started as a speaker, the first few speeches I gave were so terrifying. I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. I just wanted to die right there. And since then I've read that the two biggest fears of most people, the number one is speaking, public speaking, and the second biggest fear of humans is death. People fear speaking more than death. And I read some comedian said that means at a funeral you would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy.
Yeah, that's
how big speaking is as a fear for a lot of people. And I was one of them too, totally one of them. And I think one of the first decent-sized keynotes I ever gave was at a church about the work of Catherine Hamlin and the work I was doing there. And it was so terrifying, so bad that I couldn't even actually hear myself properly through the AV system. Like my voice sounded all weird and I just worked out that I had to just do it, that I could feel the fear and do it anyway, and I wouldn't die. And gradually I got better. And I got to the point where I could hear myself fine, didn't need the stage to swallow me up. And that old saying, you just got to keep practicing, it made all the difference. Then I realized I could just tell stories, and stories are dead easy to remember. And stories, your voice travels in a certain pattern, a certain wave when you tell stories, and that's really listenable. So you go on a really nice sing-song that's not easy to listen to and follow. And I thought about that because I was raised in the church, and I had this radar. As soon as someone starts to sound like a preacher, it's like there's a button in my brain and I go, and I just but when the preacher starts to tell a story, like I was at the supermarket the other day, their voice changes completely. So I worked out I could just tell stories, and they're dead easy to remember, and people love them. So that's when I became a good speaker. So I'm so glad I didn't let fear of those first few goes at presenting stop me from just doing it anyway. Usually my saying is, if something really scares you, that's probably where you actually need to go.
I agree.
And it's just fear, really, you can reduce fear. It's just a feeling in your tummy. And
sometimes what I say is like it's the stress response. So much of what it is perceived threat or perceived danger. And we can actually like connect in with that and learn to recognize when our body's in that state of being. And we can have these like tools like breath work or even postural stuff that we can actually use to just consciously calm the body down and get out of that fear.
Because it's quite illogical. In that situation, you're perfectly safe.
Exactly.
They're just looking at me. Someone gave me some really great advice along the way. I have a mentor who's one of the best speakers in Australia, and he said to me, from the get-go, the audience wants you to succeed. You go on there, they're already grinning at you. And it's because the thought of a speaker bombing is it's like subconsciously agonizing for the audience. They're already rooting for you. They're like, they're nodding, they're smiling, and you haven't even spoken yet. So he was like, they already love you. So just deliver.
Beautiful.
That was good advice.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to finish with two things, actually. So one of the things is if you could give some strategic tips or advice for anyone who's listening to this who wants to start a business or has a creative idea or a project that they'd like to get off the ground, what little bits of advice would you give someone who's maybe just right at the beginning of that journey?
Okay. Think of a really good name that explains it well, that's easy to pronounce. I come across people all the time who name their business, some unpronounceable Spanish word that means lightness or something. That it's just, pick a simple name for your business that's easy to pronounce. That's like, bam. Yeah. Then go register the URL. This sounds so basic, but it's often what's backtracked on. So someone will go all the way along, they'll develop products and realize that was a shit name. And then they backtrack, rename everything, repackage everything, and register URLs. So then any name for a business, Google the hell out of that thing and make sure that it isn't already, overlapping in your world. Choose that business name, short, sharp, punchy, and register the URL. Then I always look for fun. So make sure that what you're doing is fun, and the actual doing of the do that is your business is the kind of fun you want to do.
Yeah.
If, say, e-commerce and packaging goods all day is not what you want to do, don't make candles and sell them. The making of the candles is actually a really small, the manufacture and choosing the scents and all that. It's a tiny fraction of what you do. And the rest is e-commerce and battling product pages and Facebook advertising and pickling your pixel, and it's all a computer job.
Totally.
And it's packing goods. And so think about the doing of the do.
I think what a lot of people don't realize is especially a lot of artists and creatives is we have this passion for the creative process, but then we don't actually realize what's involved in running a business.
Yeah, that's right. And that for artists, especially painters, it's all about Instagram and showing in Melbourne. And if you don't want to do Instagram or show in Melbourne, it's going to be tough, really tough. But yeah, I really think that doing of the do is important.
Yeah.
If you're a personal trainer and you love training people and you love that daytime stuff, don't buy a gym because that's the last thing you'll be doing.
Yeah.
You'll be doing payroll and rostering and all that stuff. So just be mindful of the doing of the do. I love speaking, and that's why I do what I do, because a big chunk of my time is on stage speaking to audiences, but I've got to do the admin in the back end as well, and all the outbound marketing and all the things that go with actually showing up and walking on a stage. Yeah. And I don't mind doing the admin at all. I just do a little bit every single day so that it doesn't mount up into a pain.
Yeah.
Those are my two very practical pieces of advice. Choose a good name, register the URL, and think hard about the doing of the do. Is that what you actually want to spend your one wild precious life and the sunniest of days doing?
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. And then finally, I'd love to hear from you. What's one of the wildest, most empowering or exhilarating things that you've done in your career where you were looking out from your own eyeballs, from your lens of reality, being like, whoa, I fucking made it. This is success. This is like my dream come true. Like, can you share with us a moment like that you've had in your life where whoa, this is it?
I've had a few moments like that at different stages. I remember securing $1 million donation from one lady.
Wow.
And that was pretty wild. I didn't shake that tree. I didn't chase her or make that happen. She just came out of the woodwork and sort of stalked us a bit, followed us, made sure she liked what we were doing, and then just walked into my office. Incredible. I've got a donation, and I pulled out one of those little slips. I was like, "Oh, how much would you like to donate today?" And she said $1 million. And I nearly fell off my chair. So that was quite a moment, but I'm not sure that I made it happen. I then helped make sure it happened and made sure it got spent in all the ways that made her super happy. Recently, I spoke to an audience. It was about 250 people, Heritage Bank. And that's not a huge audience, but they were just such an engaged audience. And usually after a speech, I think of all the things I could have done better, and I actually take notes.
Yeah.
And I record every single speech so that I can listen back. And And that one I came away from thinking, I reckon that's the best speech I've ever given. I just met them where they were at, and they loved everything I had to give them. And the bosses had bought every single person in the audience a copy of my memoir. So everyone got a book, which was really fun.
Amazing.
And it was like everything I wanted being a speaker to be was exactly that at that event. It was on the Gold Coast in a gorgeous hotel. Everyone got a book. The audience just loved what I had to give. They made me feel so fantastic. And I was on cloud nine for yonks after that. So if that's what doing what I do looks like, I am really happy lady.
Incredible.
Yeah, really fun.
Doing what you love and making a radical impact.
Yeah, changing people's thinking, but also it's really nice to be paid well for what I do.
Yeah.
So that's also an achievement in itself, that I'm paid well for what I do. I actually earn more than I did as a CEO working as a speaker.
Yeah.
And it's not killing me. I'm not working monster hours. I can be around for my kids. I'm sort of monetizing the experience from those years, turning it into stories and ways of looking at things differently. And happy days, being paid well.
Yeah, brilliant. That's what we want. Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for spending the time with us here today, and well, with me and the extended me that is the ether world of the internet.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
you're a really good interviewer. Really good.
Oh, thank you. It is one of the things that I've realized is one of my little loves that I love to do, which is why I'm starting this little podcast project, even though I've got all this weird fear around it, and but
you're a really good interviewer. Off you go.
Thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
If people want to find you and follow you and find your book, can please direct them on?
Yeah, sure. I'm dead easy to find. I'm the Lucy Bloom, not any old Lucy Bloom. TheLucyBloom.com. Or if you put in The Lucy Bloom in any social media, you'll find me. Yeah.
Brilliant. Amazing. So wonderful to have you here, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks. I've got to go to the hairdresser. This is what I look like when I'm a before shot.
Yeah, brilliant. Still fantastic.
All right, good to see you, Lily.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day.
Bye.